And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. There is a silence that grows when ties loosen, a silence not of peace, but of absence. It is easy to see the fractures in democracy, the widening inequalities, the shrinking civic spaces. Harder to see is the slow erosion beneath them, the thinning of the relational fabric that once made shared life feel inevitable, not optional. This essay begins in that hollowing, not to offer a plan for restoration, but to stay with the difficulty of what has been lost. Drawing from the quiet urgency of Andy Haldane's reflection on social capital and Robert Putnam's enduring metaphor of the solitary bowler, we trace the cost of disconnection beyond statistics and into the heart of belonging itself. What follows is not a solution, but an invitation to reimagine freedom not as distance from others, but as the fragile, unfinished work of trusting that presence still matters. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when a society begins to hollow. It is not announced with sirens or declared with banners. It happens in the quiet withdrawal of one hand from another, in the slow fading of habits that once stitched people together without needing to be named. Andy Haldane's image of the lone bowler is not a quaint lament for lost hobbies. It is the shape of a deeper fracture, the unravelling of relational life itself. When connection thins, the consequences spill outward. Trust no longer flows through civic veins, participation shrinks into spectacle, and the shared spaces of meaning collapse into private performances of survival. But the real cost is subtler still. It is the loss of a certain imagination, the fading sense that life among others is not merely tolerable but necessary. Without that, even the scaffolding of democracy begins to sag, no longer tethered to the quiet discipline of belonging. And yet, the act of noticing this unravelling is itself a gesture of refusal, a way of keeping alive the possibility that presence can still be rebuilt, not through grand strategies, but through the stubborn, unseen labour of beginning again. It is tempting to think that rebuilding begins with programmes, reforms or initiatives, that what has frayed can be sewn back by design. But what Haldane points toward more quietly is the stubbornness of relational life, how it resists command, how it cannot be summoned by decree. The bonds that hold a community together are not produced in moments of collective agreement, but in the unnoticed persistence of showing up, in the smallest refusals to drift apart. The strength of a society is measured less by its policies than by the texture of its everyday recognitions. Those moments when a stranger is not a stranger, when a civic space does not feel like a threshold but a room already known. Without these small accumulative acts, the structures built atop them, governments, economies, institutions, lose their gravity. They exist, but they do not hold. Repair, then, is not a matter of strategy. It is a slow, often thankless reclamation of relation itself, a gathering without fanfare, a presence that for once stays. The danger, Haldane suggests without insisting, is that in seeking to fix the visible symptoms, polarisation, economic disparity, democratic fatigue, we might overlook the quieter devastation underneath. The loss is not first institutional but imaginal, a thinning of the very sense that participation matters, that another's fate is somehow entangled with one's own. When relational infrastructures decay, what follows is not merely disconnection, but a hollowing of the ethical imagination itself. A world where others are no longer encountered as co-inhabitants, but as obstacles, competitors, abstractions. In such a world, every attempt at repair risks being treated as another transaction, another performance. What is needed is something slower, something less legible. The slow cultivation of regard that cannot be audited or incentivized, that bears no immediate utility, but without which no system, however well designed, can endure. It is not trust in institutions that must be restored first. It is trust in the fragile, unseen weave of life among others. To name this unravelling solely as a civic or economic crisis would be to misread its depth. It is not only that institutions falter when trust erodes, but that the very idea of shared life becomes precarious. What withers is not merely cooperation, but the subtle mutual recognition that once made cooperation possible without coercion. In the absence of this, even acts of charity can curdle into condescension. Even calls for unity can sound like threats. Repair cannot be demanded. It must be invited, through gestures too small to legislate, through a willingness to be interrupted by the needs and presences of others. Haldane's invocation of the bowler alone is not a nostalgic tableau. It is a quiet indictment of a world that has mistaken autonomy for health. True resilience is relational. It grows not from strength, but from the slow, vulnerable art of depending and being depended upon without guarantee. The temptation always is to believe that once lost, such bonds can be quickly replaced through better networks, smarter technologies, more efficient forms of gathering. But presence does not scale that way. It cannot be manufactured by policy or conjured by innovation. It emerges, or it does not, from the willingness to remain in proximity to others, even when no immediate reward appears. It forms in the long patience of communities that refuse to collapse into private despair. In this light, Haldane's call is not for nostalgia, but for a recovery of patience itself. A patience with the slow, often invisible work of relation, a patience with imperfection, with awkwardness, with the failures that inevitably accompany attempts to live among others. The real cost of bowling alone is not measured in votes lost or GDP points missed. It is measured in the weight of a silence that thickens when no one expects to be seen anymore, and in the fragile courage required to step back into that silence, still willing to be recognised. To rebuild from such a place is not to recreate what was, but to risk what might be. It is to accept that the ties we need most cannot be scripted or secured in advance. They must be encountered as frail, contingent, interruptible. Haldane gestures toward a future that does not seek to restore an idealised past, but to cultivate a different kind of resilience, one grounded not in certainty, but in the willingness to remain porous to the lives of others. A civic imagination that does not begin with grand designs, but with the smallest recognitions that the person across from you matters, even when they do not serve your interests, even when they cannot be named as part of your tribe. In this sense, the work ahead is neither purely political nor purely personal. It is relational in the deepest way, the slow reweaving of a world in which freedom is not the absence of obligation, but its most careful, chosen form. If presence is to be rebuilt, it must begin where spectacle cannot reach, in the unseen accumulations of regard, patience, and shared risk. No campaign will announce its arrival. No metric will capture its growth. It will move quietly, threading through the spaces left hollow by disconnection, a nod instead of averted eyes, a hand steadied without demand, an invitation that does not presume acceptance. In such gestures, small and stubborn, the architecture of belonging begins again, not as nostalgia, not as strategy, but as a recognition that life among others is not an accident to be managed, but a condition to be honoured. The loneliness named in the image of the solitary bowler is not inevitable. It is a choice, reiterated across 1,000 moments where relation might have been risked and wasn't. The work now is to risk it again, without guarantee, without applause, simply because nothing that matters can be rebuilt without it. There will be no moment when the work is done, no signal that the weave is complete. Relation does not end in resolution. It endures in tension, in repetition, in the daily risking of presence without certainty. To count the cost of bowling alone is not to seek restitution from history, but to accept the open, unfinished task of living among others as itself a form of creation. Not a return, but a becoming. Not a program, but a posture. In this slow, stubborn rebuilding, the future of democracy, of community, even of meaning itself, will not be secured by force or brilliance, but by the fragile, patient trust that presence once offered can be met. Even now, especially now. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research, and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.